Peace. This one's going to hit a little different today. And it may not be something that everybody necessarily wants to hear, but I think it's something that we need to hear. And this definitely isn't me going about in any manner trying to just teach, but rather just to show to other people what may have been overlooked, what may not have been contextually applied in a manner for us to really know what it was meant, or to just change the mindset in which we approach some of these texts to really get the deeper message underneath it all. Right? It's like, say that. It's like, no. But what's been kind of interesting as my head and myself were able to kind of review this weekend, and then a couple things staggered up this morning that have just really been showing me that, as my father, my physical earth father has always said to me, that life is not hard per se, but sometimes it's the decisions that we make that make it hard. Sometimes it can make it easier, but with any decision that we do make, at the end of the day, we have to either deal with the consequences of our actions or rather take responsibility for what may come in results of that. But at the very top of it all, we made that decision whether to go or halt. So, over the weekend, or so-called weekend, my head and I were reading Proverbs 6 and 7. And it was showing us that the people of Israel were, at the end of the day, of course, a little bit rebellious. And I pointed out that it was actually kind of comical because in chapter 6, it was talking about the Most High's plight and his story overall, and how he had cleared out the land and planted these choice vines, and he was creating a vineyard. And he was all excited, as he should be. Any person who's exercised their green thumb knows how excited it can be to put the seed into the ground and wait for that anticipation of like, oh, it's going to be a good crop. I put a lot of stuff, a lot of effort, love and effort, tender care, tender mercies into this crop, right? So then you wait a couple months or however long. Time is what it is. But you wait that period of time that it takes for you to actually start to bear the fruit of whatever you put in the ground. And the Most High then recognized among some of the good grapes that he planted, some of them came out of the ground a little bit wild. And he was like, that's not what I planted. Like, how did that come out? Or he's like, I did plant grapes. And he doesn't have remorse over it. But over what happens is that sometimes the grapes may not be the exact quality of what you expected to get out of that crop. So in the literal text of what it was saying, he just said that there were wild grapes. So little curious me, wild stood out to me for some reason really hard that morning. And I went to look it up. And in the concordance, it was like wild. But then it also said wild donkey, and the word was arad. And I was like, wild donkey. The literal of that is almost to say, excuse my language, parents, excuse my language, anybody else who might be sensitive to this. I don't usually cuss like this, but wild donkey, stubborn jackass. So I'm not saying that's what you are. Not at all. Don't take it like that. But if we were thinking about it in a sense of where we are as a people and the conditions that we're going through, we might be some plumb stubborn eehaws. So to really carry that forth into the next passage that was still being spoken on and read over, okay, if you keep that mindset that we're being some stubborn ehos, we could then see that in the next verse, it was talking about the gate and how most of the things, pretty much everything that's happened to the nations has been by their own, I don't want to just say ammunition, but by their own doing. And this takes me back around to what we had spoken about in terms of life being hard by the decisions that we make. Follow me here. So, as a gate, contextually, in scripture, of course, if you take it back to the tongue that it was translated from, that word is sha'ar. Now, sha'ar can mean hair. It can mean decision. It could mean determination. It could also mean a terrible thing, because we recognize that unlike English, where it's pretty much a one-dimensional language, a lot of the other languages that you can potentially speak in this world have multiple meanings. And I'm not saying that English doesn't do this as well, but a lot of times you'll find that like some of the words that things are translated into in English fall short of the dynamics and the whole essence of the word, because English is pretty straightforward and literal to an extent. Even though we do have things with double meanings and stuff, there is a thing. This is why split tongue is a factor. But because of the fact that we know that it can be off of your decisions or your determination that allows you to either walk through the gate or to precisely, essentially just be stuck at the gate, we make that decision whether we're going to carry forth in the proper will and the proper actions, or if we're going to be faced with a reflection of ourselves that may not be as desirable as we want it to be. But to apply this in a contextual sense, in days of old, to create a doorway, a lot of people would put animal fur or animal wool, hair around their doorways. And this wasn't necessarily to say like, oh yeah, fashion statement, but it was more so in a position of function, or for a function and purpose of keeping the sand, dust, impurities out of the household. I mean, who wants to really have a doorstep that's constantly dusty, tracking mud and dirt throughout your house, when you can literally just solve it by putting that lamb's wool, or you can put whichever animal. I mean, there's only but so many animals you really want to have just kicking it at your door like that, but to keep the dust out. Now, that's not going to say that it's going to necessarily keep a stranger out of the door, but that does mean that there's a lesser chance that something that's not supposed to be inside of your house, your bed, or if we really want to boil it down, your temple, because as we see in 2 Corinthians 6:19, the Most High has actually prescribed that his people are his temple. The things that are really bringing glory to him in the places of worship. Yes, the people together, when they gather, become not only a larger assembly, in a sense they become a city, because people who are, a lot of times when you're dealing with cities, they're going to have a common mentality, a commonality that's just going to tie them together as a city, like whether it be the perimeter that actually surrounds them and keeps them together, or usually it's going to be of like mind. So potentially a stranger can still enter through into the temple or the gate or the house. But what ends up happening is that if a stranger is there with a different mentality or an unwelcome guest, sometimes, I mean, you can sit down with your enemies in order to prepare a dinner for reconciliation. But at the end of the day, unless that person is willing to reconcile with you, you shouldn't really have them in your house, because more so likely they're going to cause destruction or they're going to create confusion, because you're not really going to see eye to eye, and therefore that foundation is going to be shaken and stirred. No James Bond. But to bring a further analysis to that, and this may not be as pleasant to speak about, as with any of these chats that we end up having, I am still continuously in a HIPAA mindset from past jobs and responsibilities that I've had, where if you need to have conversation, because I recognize it's not always it's not always an easy conversation, and excuse the plane flying over me, it's not always an easy conversation to have with just anybody, but sometimes it is something that needs to be discussed, and a lot of times we do end up having repercussions that affect our daily goings and comings that make it hard for us to progress in the direction that we're needing to be in. So if you ever need anybody to speak to, I am completely, you can come to me anonymously, you can come to me privately, and I will not disclose that I am not a person who gossips, but you know where to reach us, and I can post further information if that's ever a situation, and it doesn't have to be just off of this conversation that you reach out. Okay, back to my point though. And I unfortunately don't have the citation in my head right now, but there's a time when a daughter of Israel, literally Jacob, was taken by a man of another nation, a royal of another nation, and he was so enthralled by this woman, and he was like, I want her to be my wife. And of course, we were a lot more steadfast in keeping a woman's virtue to herself until marriage, because we saw it as not only something where it's like a woman is a value of negotiation, but she's also she's pure. Like there is a metaphysical and spiritual aspect to that really plays a valuable part in why our ancestors did these things. But that can be discussed a little further later. But anyway, the point is that this man was so in lust, in love, whatever you want to call it, with this woman, that he actually took her from her father's household. Like, didn't even really like offer up this money or anything like that to say like, I respect your doings and I'm really grateful you brought this woman into the world. I want her, so I'm gonna have her. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. So he took her. And when we see took in that context, it can also mean not only like I took you in the physical, like you're living in my house now, but I took you in your body. I crossed into your gate. And her brothers weren't finna have that. So they literally came after this man who took their sister without any right to her, because he wasn't even of nation. A lot of times we were a lot more strict, where it's like you have to marry within your tribes. And there's with reason, reflecting back on why cities come together and the commonalities that are amongst. Like you usually have the common mindset. And because he took her, they rampaged. And they were like, we're getting our sister, that's not happening. Like you've I don't want to say tainted her, but you've done things that you weren't supposed to do and you knew were wrong. Your decision was wrong. Your sha'ar was with malintent. You crossed over our gates and you polluted our gates, our house. So now it's time for you to deal with the consequences of your actions. Those two brothers went through and ransacked an entire city. Sit on that. If a stranger comes into your house, you are allowed to defend your house. If something obstructs you from the decision, the proper decision, the will and the desire that you were supposed to be acting on, you are allowed to face that horrible circumstance and defend yourself. So what happens in this time when we have made the decisions to lessen our defenses? Does the stranger get to live in our house alongside us? Does the stranger get to take over our house? Is our protection so battered and low, there's no hair around our door, that everything becomes dusty, worn down, and desolate? Do you ever come to the desire to make that decision to change it? We are the gatekeepers that could have fortified our doorways. And yet, after a period of time, we've decided that life was okay the way that it was, and let anybody come in to and fro. We let enemies dine at our tables. We had a desire of reconciliation. Maybe they came in with one showing that they wanted to reconcile, but maybe didn't really have that intention at heart. Life is easy, but sometimes the decisions that we choose to make are what makes it difficult. Are you going to make a decision to go back to your original manner? Are you going to make that decision to reflect on the wisdoms that were given to us to clean up house? Are you going to make that decision as a woman or man to be the piece of gold that the Most High had created you to be the cultivated grape that was supposed to produce sweet wines instead of bitter, wild grapes, with tough skins, maybe not as much juice possible to be crushed out of it. You can't make an aged and good, proper wine, but yet we allow ourselves to just be grapes that maybe ripen too hard and then they die off and they're not really held to an esteem. We have to want to be that fine wine. I know a lot of y'all out there, we drink wine. And I mean, if it tastes bitter, you don't want to sip on it. Like, you could get that $2 wine from the liquor store, but who really wants that? Why not be that Chianti, excuse me, or be that fine Merlot, be a dry red, or you can even be a sweet white. Or not a sweet white. Moscato is Kool-Aid, but I'm not, neither here nor there. We're not getting off that topic. We're not getting on that topic. Be a good Shiraz if you want to be something. Aim for the sky. Anyway, point being is that, and I hope I didn't lose you in some of this beat around. But my final thought to all of this is that in the decisions that you make, we have to remember that sometimes it's easier to just keep your house a little messy. But is it worth it? Sometimes it's easier to press the snooze button on your alarm clock. But was it worth it? Did you get ahead and have a proper start to your day? Or did you get out of bed feeling a little sluggish? Because a lot of times we don't even recognize that when we hit the snooze button, it actually makes it harder to get out of the bed. Like, the first time you wake up, okay, yeah, you were disrupted from your deep slumber, but the beginning stages of you going back to sleep, putting yourself in that initial state of REM, is like the worst part of sleep pattern to wake up out of, because then you feel groggy again. Like, your whole body literally just got sprinkled with like Sandman dust again. You should have just woke up the first time. I felt that this morning. I was like, it's cold, I don't want to get out of bed, and I hit the snooze button, and then it was like literally pulling myself out of bed with bricks. But now I'm here because the Most High has put this word in my thoughts, in my mind, to be received and to be released into other people's eardrums. Because when I hold my tongue, that's when I feel like I've not done my full service. So this might be a long one. We're hitting 20 minutes at this point, but I hope that it's something that you've received and actually are able to understand what it is that I'm speaking on. I might have rambled again. I'm going off script. I'm not doing this with anything sitting in front of me or anything of that nature, but I want you to really receive what's being said. Put that lamb's wool around your door It's okay to protect yourself from the understandings of what's going on around you, but you have to maneuver wisely. And the only wisdom that you can acquire in this world that is of true wisdom, as I want you to reflect and I implore you to read Proverbs 11 as well. The only real wisdoms that you receive, you will gain what you need in this life from having them. I promise you this. It may not seem like you're elevated, you may not drive the flashiest cars, but you have a life sufficient, and you have, at the end of the day, a life abundant if you submit yourself to this way. Excuse that plane. But even the plane, the mechanicals were like, yeah, I got you, sis. I'm even going to dampen out your sound because I know you're hitting on something. But for real, in all sincerity, guard your door. And as I was rambling a little bit beforehand with the reflection of it's not an easy conversation, especially when someone's been taken, when they weren't trying to be taken. The reason why we were not supposed to just take on anybody to be in our house is because when you deal with somebody in a physical manner, be it even just by being in close proximity, sometimes you take on their energies. And even literally, you can take on their seeds. The seeds that go into the ground. We have several gates in our physical body. And sometimes those strangers try to make themselves comfortable entering into those gates. But again, they can cause confusion. It can cause discord. It can cause things that are not easy to reconcile after it's been done. So allow yourself to live a life that's easy. Make the right decisions and move forward in true faith, wisdom, guidance, and an abundant mindset. So with that, I say shalom. Ooh, peace.